Welcome to FO Podcast. I'm Haruko Satoh, specially appointed professor at Osaka University. Today, I am delighted to have an old dear friend from Leiden University, Florian Schneider from the Leiden Asia Center, to talk a bit about digital nationalism in China and some of the recent policy developments, including some controversial or interesting visa policies, which I hope would, in a way, shed light to some of the complexities and overlooked facets of what is China that we all tend from Japanese all the way to Europeans, not to mention Americans, oversimplify. So I'd like to welcome first Florian, and would you like to do some brief introduction?
Well, thanks for having me. Yeah, so my name is Florian Schneider. I am the chair professor for modern China at Leiden University, where I have worked quite extensively on nationalism in particular. I did some work years ago on how Chinese-Japanese relations get represented on the internet. Always a controversial area of discussion, especially in China, and what we can learn about nationalism in China, who's at the helm of some of these online developments. Is anyone at the helm? And I think these topics keep coming back every time there's any sort of international altercation or a hot button topic that comes up. And so in that sense, I think it's good that we're picking this as a topic because, as you said, there's new visa regulations from China that have been stirring up some controversy.
Right. And also, I'd like to bring up the fact that Florian has history at lecturing at my school, Analyst, and for the past 10 years, he comes every now and then to...
Whenever I can, yeah.
Yes. And today we are actually recording this podcast at the sixth floor conference room at OSIP. And I'm hoping that we'll be able to also cultivate something rather not just on the digital nationalism side. And today's podcast, actually, the questions and the scenarios were made sometime this January, if you remember. And it's been sort of formulated by a student who's taken my global governance class, and one of the assignment was to design a scenario and list of questions for a podcast recording. And this student was very, very specific about this topic, and also hoping to be able to interview you. So we are very fortunate.
That
and so
worked
when
out, yeah.
when you sort of told me that you're coming, the first thing I did was to tell the students that hey, Florence coming, so we can do this.
Yeah, it's always nice, and someone reads your book, and you can tell from her questions that she knew what I was working on.
Yes,
which is
it's one
lovely.
of the nice things when in a university, when you sort of get to meet your author that you
someone you cited
admiring.
somewhere.
Yeah.
It's not just a footnote then. Right?
So anyway, first I'd like to sort of start with, well, she has very particular questions.
Right.
But first, one of the context, I think it seems to be about the sort of the algorithms and the purpose of these algorithms and so on. This is where, the students' sort of interest was.
Yes.
But I'm actually also like to make this conversation into a layman's introduction to digital China.
Yeah.
And as we were first talking about, was mentioned about some of the visa policies, I'd like to start with what is the general direction that Chinese visas?
Well, I think there's a couple of things happening at the same time. One is to try and use visa regulations to showcase China as a reliable place for people to visit, to come to, by extension, a reliable partner. So there's a whole dimension of soft power involved as well, and cutting back on the red tape that's required to visit. It's not that long ago that most Europeans, if they flew to China, had to fill in an extensive amount of documentation, get an invitation, show that the ticket was already booked, all this upfront work, only to then later learn, did you get your visa or not? You'll find out later. And it was very stressful and strenuous and in many ways unhelpful. And so without reciprocity, China has removed most of those barriers. And now you can, as a European, I think it's for 2 weeks, 30 days even, fly to China without having to do anything other than apply for your little online card. And so, yes, the Chinese government is, of course, very much proclaiming this as an example of Chinese benevolence on the international stage for what it can do for foreign visitors, even when, let's say, the European government does not do the same. The other trajectory is to bring talent to China. And that's what this K visa story is about, because the Chinese government issued a visa option which does not require an invitation. It allows you to work in China, but you don't need an invitation from a work unit, which is quite rare, because normally if you wanted to stay for longer periods in China, you need to be associated with one particular company or organization, and they are responsible for you and for high degree talents, people from high level universities who've graduated with minimally a BA in a STEM related field. These older requirements now no longer hold. So it's possible straight out of university to travel to China, and the idea is, I suppose, try and find a job on the job market, make connections, and that's supposed to attract folks from around the world.
Is this something that is sort of also very conscious of what the Trump administration's been doing in their sort of new immigration policy?
I'm pretty sure that it's a reaction to that as well, because for the Chinese government, of course, the Trump administration is in many ways a godsend, at least in terms of propaganda and public relations, because it's just you have this nightmare guy who's clearly rolling out xenophobic policies all around. And so for the Chinese government to be able to set itself up as a counterpoint to that and say, this is what a great power should do. This is also true for South-South relations, for instance, engagement in African countries or in South and Southeast Asia, as you're the expert of, right? But the Chinese government is, I think, must be secretly quite pleased with how much the Trump administration has damaged U.S. reputation
particularly
in
with
the world.
Yeah, not just immigration, but if you think about the cutting of USAID. And
yes, that was a
so that's
massive
South-South
disaster.
or North-South.
Yeah.
In that sense, China's in a position to take or away the talents who would have otherwise maybe gone to the US.
Yes. And I think there's a couple of areas where this is of massive strategic importance to the Chinese government. One is certainly anything that's AI related, ICT, high tech. Also, the green economy, anything that's green technology matters a great deal, and things like EVs, electronic vehicles. So there's a number of sort of front lines for industrial policy, which require a particular kind of talent. I suppose this is connects to the wish to make China a global superpower in these areas.
So, I mean, this, I think, are there any takers from Europe?
I have not yet. I briefly checked online what people were saying about the experience, and so far it doesn't seem to be very attractive to a lot of folks. Maybe also because the idea of arriving in China and looking for a job without having that already set up isn't necessarily very attractive because the economic situation in China is not as rosy as the government makes it seem. So I really don't know how well the scheme is running overall. But I had not heard of it until we planned this conversation because, I'm not sure how popular a high-tech STEM-related visa application for Europeans or for Americans is.
I mean, I hear that these days, now that some of the numbers are coming up, the number of, record number of Americans leaving the United States, and with the World Cup looking like a very disastrous sort of tournament. Apart from, say, China sort of reaping the opportunities that, as you say, they haven't sent U.S. self-demolition. What do you think in the long run, if any, particularly for say Europeans or other Asians, we need to watch, particularly about, say, working in China?
I think, it's kind of a cliche that academics will say, you need to have a nuanced perspective and really embrace the complexities. But it's also true. It's extremely important. I think we overlook a great deal of what happens in China if we only focus on the state and the party and assume that that's really the only actor we should be concerned with. That also goes for assuming that because the state has this ambition to effectively design a new form of authoritarianism that is very tech savvy, that it must be successful at doing so, and that everything in China is consequently highly controlled and regimented. That's not the case in most places, right? And so there's a lot under the surface that is happening, even if it's not always visible. And that's also one of the reasons I'm interested in public discussions and things like nationalism, because this is where you sometimes see undercurrents come to the fore, sometimes bubbling to the front, and that's sometimes what we see then can be worrying or even dangerous, especially when it comes to sort of chauvinistic attitudes towards outsiders. It's true everywhere. Yeah.
We're getting good at it too.
No, one of my points usually when talking about nationalism in China is that the story isn't just about China. It is a useful window looking through various kinds of social media and public discussions at what is going on in China. But many of the dynamics that unfold, especially when it comes to sort of these aggressive attitudes, the toxic behaviors and so on, are very similar to what we see elsewhere. And in a sense, I think one of my arguments has always been we should be looking at China not just to learn something about China, but to learn something about digital politics anywhere, really.
Right. I mean, I'm sort of curious about this digital side too, but first, before we move to the algorithm and all of those things, I'd like to continue a bit with the K visa and the implications, particularly domestic implications, particularly because we also hear that university graduates are not getting jobs.
Yes, yeah.
So on the one hand, you have a situation where the job market is, if not shrinking, it's not as optimistic. And then the Chinese government also is trying to say, okay, we're open for business for talented people from abroad. Are these things consciously done, or are they just overlooking each other and saying, well, this is the reality, but we also have to do this? Is this some coordinated thing, or?
That's hard to say. I wish I could look inside the decision making there. One of the reasons, again, it's easy to assume that everything that the state does must be planned centrally, and it comes with a 5-year plan and grand perspectives and so on. Very often, one side of the bureaucracy doesn't actually know what the other side does. Local governments don't always communicate with the central government, and that's just the state. If you add the party to it and how decisions work there, it's very the Chinese government and its governance is just as complicated as, or maybe more so, than in other countries. So I can't tell you why exactly they rolled out this visa scheme, knowing as they must that, especially for young people in China, the situation is quite dire. There's plenty of folks who are going to university. They were promised, if you graduate, you're graduating into a world where you're going to be better off than your parents. You're going to be able to get your house, your car, your family now with more than one kid, and that promise is no longer true for many people. There's plenty who are deciding to lie flat, as it's called, out of frustration, right? To just bail out of the rat race and say, I'm not doing this anymore. There's plenty of folks who write hundreds and hundreds of applications and can't find a job. And so in that kind of environment, to see a visa scheme launched that is supposed to attract direct competition for you as a Chinese university graduate hasn't gone down so well. And that's, I think, also where we see an interesting combination of nationalist rhetoric and sort of social grievances, a sense of ennui, of inability to build that career, and these frustrations then kind of play off each other.
I mean, is there like because I know that China has a very vibrant social media environment, but aside from that being used, obviously, for people like you to gauge the heat or the mood, particularly with this K visa, is there anything noticeable that debate or points that are being discussed aside from what I sort of mentioned, that, or is this just dismissed as
Dismissed by the government, you mean?
I mean, dismissed by the people, or are they taking it as something?
No, I think they're taking it quite seriously. I mean, the debate is loud. But this is the problem when trying to judge public opinion through the lens of social media. It is useful to sort of map out what we call discourses, right? Certain topics that get discussed in certain ways, the language that gets used to do that. But it's very hard to say what is or is not actually influential because of the way that the algorithms push the loudest, most popular things to the top. And this can be, does use social media as its own window onto public discussion. And also we have some evidence, some indication that large level policy decisions do get informed by what does the public, in capital letters and big scare quotes, what does the public want? What are the discussions like? And to be responsive, in effect, to the populace through the social media discussions. The problem there, of course, is that Weibo is not an accurate representation of what Chinese people generally think, if there's such a thing as what the Chinese people think. But even just as a segment, it doesn't cover all demographics. It's much more urban centric, and it again sort of privileges through network effects very particular kinds of voices, right? The influencers, right? And those folks, fashion or things that are popular in popular culture, one thing that can get you to the top of being recognized is often nationalist rhetoric, because it's on the one hand safe to be pro-nationalistic.
You mean politically safe to?
Yeah, it's politically safe to be patriotic and to use that language. But it's also, there's an audience for that that will lap that up, unfortunately.
Well, it's the same everywhere.
Yes, it is.
Nationalism is toxic everywhere.
Yeah, and also still popular everywhere.
Yeah. So I'm actually now then going to read the questions.
Sure, yeah.
And then we can sort of expand. So one of the first questions that goes to the algorithms, and it relates to whether the algorithms have a cultural filter.
Yeah.
And the question being, does the algorithm somehow know the cultural difference between a state guest and a dangerous intruder. So I suppose it's, and is the machine reinforcing traditional cultural boundaries rather than just spreading random hate? So I think these are specific questions that I'm partly clueless.
Yeah, I think the questions go back to issues of how algorithms curate information for us. And in this sense, or in this particular case, we're talking about social media algorithms, whether it's search mechanisms, whether it's the feed that gives you the most popular things on your mobile phone, right? In China, of course, it's there's no Facebook, there's no Twitter, but the same question could be asked of Reddit, for example, in the US, and what kind of conversations happen there. So in the Chinese case, yes, these algorithms have one additional, I would say, control mechanism, and that's that they have to be approved, or the content that gets curated through them has to align itself with Communist Party guidelines for what is or is not acceptable as public discourse. But overall, it is the companies themselves who try to build that into their proprietary algorithms for things like Bilibili, Weibo, how the Weixin feed works, or Xiaohongshu, right? The little red book. I was going to say it's called Red Note is what it's called. Red Note. So the fashion platform, these companies with their algorithm is tailoring that algorithm to, on one hand, create virality and be a suitable advertising platform. That's where the money comes in, while also making sure that it is politically safe. And they have a mandate to do that. So the regulation has effectively been outsourced from the government to these corporations. And sometimes they even overcorrect. That is known to happen because they are on the spot if discussions go awry. What's then really interesting is that, nationalist discussions tend to work quite well on these social media platforms, which leads scholars like myself to say that's because it is sort of within the realm of approved topics. And people in China, when they discuss politics, often pick that that language of nationalism, that register, in order to sometimes have very heated, complex debates, sometimes criticize the government. But as long as you do it within that language, you're more likely to stay on the safe side of what is possible in these
What
platforms.
happens if you're not on the safe side?
Then
You get monitored or you get reprimanded?
your messages might get deleted, right? Get removed. Sometimes they get shadow banned. You won't even know that they're not visible to others. So they get algorithmically filtered out. You think you've posted something, but then you only get 0 or 2 or 3 views instead of the hundreds or thousands you would have normally gotten. That's on the algorithm side, and the company behind it can turn that on and off. And worst case scenario, if you're a repeat offender of problematic content, you might get your account deleted, removed, which can be, aside from being social death for many people who rely on social media for their social interactions, if you're an influencer and you're making money that way, then that can be quite literally an economic disaster for you. So there's a lot of incentives to try and be mindful of what to say online. But at the same time, people keep pushing the boundary anyways, especially when it comes to emotive topics that they care greatly about. And this visa is one, but we also saw this with, for example, the COVID lockdowns. Topics like this tend to catapult themselves into the public view, and in some instances, so much so that the party isn't able to regulate, or in some cases, we can also assume that there's people in the party itself who say, this is a topic we actually kind of want to have out there as a discussion point, whether it's for own political gain vis-a-vis some other institution or some other camp somewhere. It's hard to say, but it can be helpful to say, look, we have public discussion on this particular topic. Shouldn't we also regulate in this direction?
Just before I move to the second question, I just wanted to put out something about the China's regulations on what goes on social media. And then on the other hand, we have this out of control First Amendment Meta and so on.
Yes.
Never mind Truth Social.
Yeah.
But cumulatively speaking, if you compare the two, do you think that they sort of mirror each other? I know it sounds very...
Yeah, I think the mechanisms in the background are very similar. Again, leaving out for a moment the Communist Party's regulations for what happens on social media, but just in terms of it being corporate social media, that creates a certain number of incentives for the way that these platforms get designed, what the tech people put in them, how they calibrate them, how the monetization strategies work. And in that sense, I don't know if you're familiar with Cory Doctorow, who's a philosopher, author, tech writer. He's coined, and I apologize in advance for the crudeness, he's coined the term "enshittification" to describe what happens on platforms as they go through a cycle, offering all sorts of wonderful benefits to users, usually for free or seemingly for free, and then tightening the grasp as they basically sell the user base to some kind of partner organizations like advertisers or so on. And as they dial up the monetization, ultimately they usually go with an IPO somewhere, a public offering, and then they care really only about what the stakeholders want. And in that sense, both the experience for the users and what was initially one of the one of the partners, really, their user experiences go down, and everyone at the end of the day has a more shitty experience, and that's hence enshittification. And I think that's a term that also applies to Chinese social media, because at heart it's also corporate, and it's also concerned with how do we monetize what people are doing here in our network.
I mean, it's so ironic, right? The whole thing is, it's I don't know. I mean, I know that the economy is capitalism with some state control.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, when it comes to, particularly when social media, the customer satisfaction is going down on both sides, correct?
Yeah. Yes. An interesting facet about the Chinese media ecosystem is that the state does keep an eye out on whether these platforms have negative, we might say, side effects. I would call it a feature, not a bug, but negative externalities of some sort, and then they intervene and order companies to adjust. We've seen a couple of, again, cycles of what sometimes in English news is represented as sort of a tech crackdown against platforms, crackdown against online discussion, and so on. That's a popular way to frame this internationally, when the state brings companies to heel, or the tech entrepreneurs to heel, or intervenes in some form. But really what is often happening is a recognition of some very serious problems with the platform environment that we see elsewhere as well. For example, platforms pushing content that leads kids to self-harm, right? Or that promotes anorexia and eating disorders. And these are serious problems anywhere, but in China, certainly with these sort of trending topics where girls have to put their knees behind their iPhone to demonstrate how skinny they are, and then that goes viral. There's a lot of really horrible things going on that the Communist Party also sees and is just as horrified by. And so where in America you might not see much of an intervention when something like this happens, in the Chinese case, this is where the state steps in and takes on its paternalistic role to say we are responsible also on moral grounds to assure that what happens here doesn't get flooded with hoaxes and toxicity. That makes it then even more ironic that nationalist discussion is often allowed to thrive.
I mean, national discussions, as I said, is when that begins to sort of predominate, even if the mainstream media picks up, it's definitely a sign of, I don't know, I would say sickness.
Yeah, so some problem in the
Yeah,
background. Yeah. There's also, we shouldn't forget that nationalism in China, has been around since Mao and before. It's a modern phenomenon, sure, but the kind of nationalism we see now is really just an invention. 80s took off, especially after 1989, as a way to say, let's bring people together around this idea of the nation, because then we can justify particular kinds of politics, and we need to have people learn patriotism again so they don't become cynical about the problems we have here in China. So that was initially the intention, and since then we've had patriotic education in the school system all the way through to university, patriotic television series, patriotic programming of all sorts, books, and of course propaganda. So all of this is not new, but it also means that people who are in their 40s, 50s now have basically not known anything other than a political discussion that is shaped and characterized by nationalist terms. And so that also includes the politicians themselves. We can assume that many people in the Communist Party are genuine nationalists. And so it's always hard to say whether they approve of the discussion, whether they even notice when it's nationalistic, or if this is just so
Well, there's nothing
background.
critical about it, right? There's no critical thinking
In nationalism,
in nationalism,
not
in
towards yourself,
particular.
no. That's the whole point. Yeah.
And I think it makes it even worse, partly because we in Asia also we're not very open about truths or realities, if not truth.
Yeah.
Particularly when it comes to, because with yes, your patriotic education in China actually really resurrects this, well, not resurrects, but it brings up Japan as the best sandbag
Yeah.
to incite.
Yeah. Japan is often the target, the prime antagonist in that story.
Yeah. I mean, to the point, So it's, and that's been, as you say, a good 40 years.
Yeah. Well, one of the issues with that discourse, with sort of portraying Japan as the antagonist, when I wrote my book on this, which is called China's Digital Nationalism, if folks want to read up on it, it's a bit older now, 2018, but I was looking exactly at these conflicts. East China Sea, right? The history of Nanjing, the Nanjing massacre. How do people in China deal with that history today? And I was told at that time, well, your topic and what you're looking at, it's ancient history, right? Who cares about what happened in 1937? And only more recently, we've again seen the Chinese state and public discussion implode over, for example, someone having left a commemoration plaque at a temple in Nanjing that commemorated a tried Japanese war criminal. And the public lost its mind when they saw that, to the point where the state had to intervene and regulate what is or isn't possible at Chinese temples. And so this topic never goes away, unfortunately.
This is something that, I think China, unintended consequences of what they unleashed 40 years ago.
Yeah.
And we haven't been helpful. Japan hasn't been helpful, but now it's not us. It's basically you have a sort of a vicious cycle.
Yeah.
An ecosystem of anti-Japan rhetoric, which is quite, I don't know. I'm not being serious, but some of the things that come out is quite imaginative and amusing.
You used the word different realities or different truths earlier, and I think that's generally the case, that through social media and the way that we've structured our public discussions and the forums we use for that, we've been building ecosystems. And if these ecosystems interact with something else that is also already a giant echo chamber, which is the nation, then we're creating parallel realities for ourselves. And again, we don't have to point at China and say, oh, look, it's the Communist Party's doing, and this is what's happening there. We could make a very similar case for different European realities, or for the strangeness that is at least two major American realities that seem to exist at the same time, and people don't talk to each other across them, right?
We have them too, and like a microcosmos of contended histories.
Yeah.
But the impact, at least, is it seems to. I think it's very unhelpful when it begins to impact sort of diplomatic relations seriously. It's anyway. So.
Well, I mean, when it comes to diplomatic relations, we've seen diplomats are sometimes called wolf warriors, right? Because they make these loud claims, nationalistic claims. The term comes from a movie that's sort of like the Rambo of Chinese filmmaking, with a Chinese hero who guns down the bad guys and all that, and he's a wolf warrior, right? So this is how some diplomats see themselves, and it was quite the discussion, sort of, I think, around 2018 in particular, when the controversies around Xinjiang, the Western region in China, blew up in Western press, and the Chinese government was not amused by that criticism, and so the wolf warrior diplomats felt they need to fire back. And in the course of the pandemic, we've seen this then yet again. And the question often is then, is that coordinated? Is Xi Jinping calling someone in the foreign ministry and saying, let's all be wolf warriors? My explanation would be probably not, but that there's plenty of local diplomats who've realized that being nationalistic, speaking to a domestic audience back home that appreciates this, can be a way to promote your career. Especially if your boss is also a nationalist, then telling Sweden off, or being mean to Norway can get you points back at home.
No, I mean, I think it's, at least for between Japan and China, most Japanese, I think when the wolf warrior goes about his or her business, I think most recognize that it's for the domestic audience.
Yeah.
That if we don't take it with a pinch of salt, understanding, then it's really sort of, like the consulate. It could be quite. I don't know. I mean, it's distracting.
Yeah.
To say the least. So. But anyway, so let's go back to the K visa, not the K-pop, but the K visa question, which I think this is quite interesting, and I think it also draws from some of the discussions we've just had, which is about national security, because we already talked about the K visa sort of designed for international elites.
Yes.
And yet domestically, netizens sort of framed it as a low-end vagrants coming to steal welfare.
Yeah.
And so does this suggest that digital nationalism is becoming a kind of a class masquerade? Netizens using the politically safe language of national security to express a much more dangerous domestic fear of downward mobility and economic insecurity.
Really well observed. I think we already mentioned how this sort of lying flat worry or attitude is impacting the younger generation. And I think there's also, again, this collides with a certain amount of xenophobia that has festered alongside the nationalism, because this is maybe controversial for some to hear. I'm of the persuasion that you cannot have nationalism without some form of outsider hatred or antagonism. I mean, in general, you always, when you have an in-group, you need out-groups. Otherwise, the in-groups don't work. Right? It's just a psychological fact. But there's some folks who say, no, you can have positive nationalism, and then we're going to call that patriotism. And it doesn't have to have an outside force. I've been criticized, again, for the work on Sino-Japanese relations for having picked a topic in which you have this classic antagonist. And we all know that for the Chinese Communist Party, the 100 years of humiliation are closely tied to Japan's role during World War II and keep coming up. So am I not going to just find this kind of outgroup antagonism when I'm looking at issues that deal with Japan? But since then, I also have PhD students who've done a ton of work on issues that didn't immediately have an antagonist, like, for example, COVID nationalism. Right? During the COVID pandemic, people in the first half year, at least, being very proud of how well China handled the pandemic. This was before the worst of the lockdowns and everything went sideways. But in the beginning, it looked like China was doing one of the best jobs, right? Especially compared to European countries. But then there too, you very quickly see that it's not just a celebration of some in-group solidarity, but it's we are doing better than those other guys, right? We are doing better than the Germans or the Dutch or whoever it is at that time, and it also flipped over into xenophobic worries about outsiders, people from Africa coming in and bringing the disease, even though that's not how that worked at all. There were quite a few racist memes going around, singling out vulnerable groups as somehow carriers of infection of some sort. And so that's tied to the very nature of what nationalism is. People will find their antagonists wherever they come across them. And so in this instance, I think what we're seeing here is that, for most Chinese people, it's not politically safe to criticize Chinese elites. There's a certain amount of populism in Chinese discourse, but it usually has to target economic elites, can't touch the political elites, never mind that they are closely related. And it's easier to, yes, right? It's easier to criticize elites if they're not from China, but if it's sort of, again, symbolic elites elsewhere in American politics or so on, and to use that as a mirror, effectively, on problems in Chinese society. People are trying to have discussions about their social wars, and they are casting them in the language of nationalism and using this as one more pathway to poke at that topic.
I think this third question is actually very clever because it sort of reins in all of this stuff. And particularly because there's the consequences that the state has cultivated digital nationalism as a tool for legitimacy. But here the nationalist engine built to power China's renaissance is blocking the very policy, talent attraction, intended to secure that rise. And so the question being, do you see this as a structural turning point where the state has trapped itself inside its own digital narrative? And has the nationalist machine become too autonomous for the state to reprogram when it needs to be pragmatic?
I've been saying this for probably a decade or so. So I wouldn't say that this is now the turning point. I think the turning point is way behind us. Because, again, the Communist Party still to this day, I think, feels that it can guide public opinion. That's sort of one of those terms that the Communist Party cares greatly about, guiding public opinion. And that involves also guiding nationalist discussion. And they must think that it is possible to guide public discussion in this way. And it can look that way because the state has a lot of mechanisms at its disposal to manage what happens in online spheres, for instance. However, we've seen many cases where nationalist discussion causes them to throw bottles at embassies, or all sorts of things happen once people latch onto these aggressive, toxic ideologies. And so we've seen this in the past also during more than a decade ago when there's territorial disputes, for instance, right? And you might recall the conflicts over the Senkaku Diaoyu Islands in the East China Sea. 2012, I think, was one of those last moments where research later showed that the way the People's Liberation Army Navy was acting trailed some of the online aggressive nationalist discussions. So one of the questions in Chinese studies is, does the nationalism influence the politicians and the military, or do the military and the politicians control the nationalism? And it's a little bit of both, but there is some evidence that, yes, these online discussions do affect what Chinese politicians and Chinese military personnel do, or at least what they feel they need to signal on the international stage, because they also always have this domestic stage on which they're showcasing what they're about.
And I think it seems more than most countries, when this nationalist narrative emerges, China seems particularly more of that domestic audience oriented or directed to.
Yeah.
We have nationalists too, and now people talk about Japan's rising nationalism and going back to militarism and blah blah blah. But it's vocal, yes, but and also yes, if you go on social media, you do see some very fierce debates. But we also, I think, been fortunate maybe that some of the historical facts are dealt as historical facts. Therefore, apart from some people believing that we could have won the war, but to the extent that Japan wasn't the only bad guy. It can have some roots, but it's not like everybody's going to be painted over and say yes, Japan wasn't the only bad guy.
Yeah.
So there's some sort of if not balanced, but at least a seesaw between those who are a little more objective.
Yeah.
And the ones who feel like, no, it's enough. We've had enough gaijin. We've had enough this and the other. I mean, this is a topic for another podcast altogether.
Yeah.
But I do think that it's very important that we as in outside of China understand, or at least have an understanding of how to decipher what we see.
Yeah.
So this, in that sense, is watching this digital stuff, particularly because it only happens in Chinese. So I think it's difficult, partly if you're not, particularly if you're not in part of that inside the firewall. I have a few American friends studying in China right now, and we actually only talk to each other when he comes out.
Right. Yeah.
Not because we want to say something bad. It's just that we both feel safer if we're outside the country.
I mean, intriguingly, there's plenty of reasons, of course, to be mindful of your safety if you work on issues of politics and you happen to be involved in China, or your family there or friends. This is not news for anyone who's a China scholar or works in China. But one of the newer dimensions is that the nationalists might also come after you. And so I have a lot of also students, colleagues who are Chinese, who work abroad, who look at the situation in China and analyze aspects like this, or like, online vigilantism and so on. And you have to be very mindful of where they speak about these issues, because the nationalists might take offense and try to out them, find them, attack them, harass them, which is in many ways a bigger concern to personal safety than the Communist Party inviting you to tea to have a conversation about your views, which is unpleasant. But I'm more concerned of someone coming after me with a knife because they hate what I had to say somewhere.
It's something like that happens here too, but not necessarily with the Chinese. But when we sort of talk about, this doesn't have to go into the podcast, but with the Koreans. So. But but actually, the final question I want to ask, besides this, since this podcast is being recorded almost 5 months after the student devised the questions, right? But I would also like to take this opportunity to ask about the latest Beijing summit between Donald Trump and Xi Jinping.
Right, yes.
The optics, and what do you think? And what I don't want to do the who do you think got the better deal? But the optics, what do you think it sort of transpired outside?
Again, almost impossible to say for two reasons. One is, again, we don't know what happens in the higher levels of the Communist Party. And also, I find it very difficult to assess what the Trump administration is doing at any given moment. I sometimes read the sort of headlines from The Economist, for instance, which tries so hard to frame Trumpist politics as actually being rational at some level. Somewhere down there is a strategy, right? There must be advisors around this man who have strategy. And so they present it like politics as usual, but also there's a loud guy at the top. And I think that's a complete misjudgment. I think he in particular he has dementia. The man is not well. And the people around him enable this. And they're also nutters. I mean, these people...
Yes.
Also not smart people, I'm afraid to say. If you hire a former Fox News guy to run your military, something has gone very, very badly wrong. So these are not well educated, not well informed people who've traveled to China, bringing their family to do some nepotism somewhere behind the scenes along the way, hoping to open new Trump hotels and bringing the whole bag of CEOs to do business, and overall just looking like buffoons doing it. Whereas Xi Jinping and his folks, they have strategy, right? They have plans, they have ideas, and I think they pretty much walked over that delegation from what I can see. So not exactly a particularly strong moment for American foreign policy.
No, I mean, I think it was, for me, looking at it as an Asian, it was definitely a Emperor Xi moment when, the barbarian from the East, West, whatever, came. I mean, I don't know if this is not ironic or this fact is just lost on the Washington, D.C.
Yeah, I don't know.
I mean, if you're Asian, right?
Yeah.
And if Asians are looking at this from Korea down all the way down to, Myanmar, Brunei, in a very Chinese Confucius setting, this is not America sort of, looking strong.
Yeah.
This is being, Beijing took the mickey out of this man.
Yeah, that was
by giving the full extent of,
the little children cheering with the little flags, basically giving him the dictator
it's like,
visit, right?
See if you can have a ballroom bigger than our hall.
Yeah, yes.
I don't think America's been this insulted, and I don't know if they understand that this is insulting.
Yeah.
I'm
pretty sure that Donald Trump does not understand these things.
No, but
because he felt like like a kid in a big store, being handed the gifts, because he loves his dictators, right? He loves strongmen, and what was on display for him in Beijing was just reinforcing, like, this is fantastic. I also want this, right? I want to be like this. The guy is unfortunately relatively easy to please because you just have to speak to his narcissism, and the rest solves itself. And the Chinese diplomats had that prepared like an ace, right? It's like fantastic.
This is, if we're talking about turning points, never mind digital nationalism. Yeah. This is a turning point in that's why I asked about the optics. It's the public relations view of U.S.-China relations. America inadvertently letting go of its grip on things, and it's a very sad moment actually for me. I was like, oh my goodness, I can't believe this.
Yeah, I mean, the irony is, of course, also that the Trump administration the first time round was promising people, was telling people America's a laughing stock in the world and we're going to put a stop to that, which wasn't true. But now it is.
Now it is.
And I mean, the people who've been making this happen are exactly the people who claimed that they were going to solve this non-existent problem. And
No.
yeah, that's a clear sign of decline, right? And I think there's a lot of people in China who have studied great power politics, rises and falls of empires, and so on, who look at this and say, okay, so America's on the way down, and we're the ones who are going to step up next.
I mean, whether they think whether they can step up is another
That's
issue.
another, yeah, whether it's possible is a whole other question.
But
the ambition, I think, is there.
I mean, for us too, it's allies probably watching, thinking, "Oh my God."
Yeah, and we see a major rethinking in Europe about what transatlantic relations should be and whether they're reliable. Of course, because of also Russia and the war in Ukraine, but I think there's a great deal of rethinking of the NATO framework of what kind of military presence should Europe have, what does security politics look like, down to the very present and very visceral effects of moving money from some ministries over to defense ministries. Our universities have gotten slashed.
I mean, I think this is another thing about, I mean, we can talk about this another time, but this whole militarization thing is also wrong. There's no diplomacy, there's no détente, right? Nobody is actually trying to reconcile with anybody. Which, this goes from China, Japan, to Europe and Russia. Never mind Israel, but Europe and Russia. This has history. And to say that we are going to be trying to sort of somehow defend Europe, rather than trying to sort of formulate a different relationship. And it's the same with US, China, Japan, China. We're all of a sudden giving money to the merchants of death.
Yeah.
Without really trying to say, look, can we just... So, well, thank you very much, Florian. And I hope we have another opportunity to talk a bit more of something about that might be a little more on my realm of
topic that's outside of your comfort zone.
It is very much, yes. But
your student for was
I'm very proud.
I can see why.
So anyway, so thank you again, and hope to have another one of these soon.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you.